Woo! Welcome, family, friends, loved ones, enemies. Get it together. Witches, wizards, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth, to another episode of Disguise Coverage. A little bit of a Cover One Super Show aspect for fans of the network. We had the four horsemen that you see here in front of you on the Cover One Buffalo show last week to do a little Bills 53-man roster projection. So as of now, we know what the Bills 53-man roster looks like. We know what the practice squad looks like. We've seen some additions in different forms and fashions, and we're going to discuss that tonight while also looking back at what we finalized and settled on last week as a group on the 53-man roster. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? What are we surprised about? What do we like? What do we dislike? All those kinds of fun things for Bills Mafia. But before we get into that, little fun news, little fun stuff for the old Cover One brand. We got a little, Greg noticed it there. If you see the banner there, and if you're not watching, I'll tell you what just popped up on the screen. We got a little banner up on the bottom that says, this episode of Disguise Coverage is presented by the IDP Army. Mostly IDP, all fantasy football. Subscribe to the IDP Army channel on YouTube for weekly start, sit, live stream Q&A before every kickoff, Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern. We are very proud of this partnership here at Cover One. You will see and hear things for this sponsor here on Disguise Coverage. You will see some stuff with Sterling and the rest of the Hoof crew on Tuesday nights where we're getting ready for real football to start to come up. And, we've had the Underdog Fantasy Partnership, and now we got another fantasy football aspect. We got some more things kicking into high gear. So just one of the many awesome partnerships that we've been lucky enough to have here with Cover One. So go check out idparmy.com, get your IDP on. Greg, I know. Greg, have you dabbled more into IDP?
Yeah. I'm actually a big fan. I know the guys over there. I know Jordan, who is involved in it, and have actually done from a fantasy standpoint, have gotten into a couple leagues. I have one insane league that's literally like 32 teams, 40-man rosters, full individual defensive positions, and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I bounce stuff off of Jordan and the guys over there all the time because, it's tough when you get down into that level. These are the guys who know that stuff and take it seriously and they know the defensive side of fantasy football the same way that people will debate, do you like, Mike Williams, or do you go after Tyler Boyd? And like the way, a lot of people get into that level of fantasy and understand it. They can do that with which linebacker you should, draft from the Chargers versus, KJ Wright signed with the Raiders today. That's a huge deal in that world. It's a really interesting realm of fantasy football and something I recommend. It helps and makes it a different, entertaining watch when you watch football and have a team that has those kind of things.
It's definitely a neat little wrinkle to throw into fantasy football. I know a bunch of my boys have done leagues where they've started to replace different position groupings, whether it's a kicker or even one of their flex spots with an IDP spot, or just added it overall because it's another added layer and just makes you appreciate Aaron Donald that much more.
You have friends outside of us?
Well, imaginary friends count, and they play a lot of fantasy football. They're very active.
I must just laugh.
Yeah, we bounce a lot of ideas off of each other, me and them, and they're always around. They're great and really great and supportive. That was hurtful. And that's enough of that, Aaron. That was mean. Very mean. Very mean. But I digress. As the episode was titled, grading our Buffalo Bills roster projection. So we're going to start from where we left off last week in terms of predicting this roster. And one of the things, we're not going to go right into position groupings. I want to just start with a kind of a question, pose some things to everyone. Sterling, we're going to start with you.
Yes.
What was your biggest surprise? Could be a positive, could be a negative. What was your biggest type of moment when it came to this roster?
That's a good question. I mean, it's pretty clear answer. Our tight end that we thought that was just going to make the roster, Jacob Hollister, was probably the biggest, I didn't know that they really felt that strong about Tommy Sweeney. I mean, we really haven't said too much about him or seen much of him. Hell, I don't even know much about him, like what he's done on the field. I mean, I just didn't know that Brandon Beane was like, no, this is our guy. And I guess it kind of makes sense when you look at, how things went throughout the offseason where, that Zach Ertz stuff never happened. And I guess they fully endorse Dawson Knox now, and Reggie Gilliam being in that hybrid role. So Tommy Sweeney, maybe he can come in and have an impact. I hope he's better at blocking. I know that was one of his weak spots. So it's something to look out for.
What about
Eric
you,
spoke
Aaron?
a lot about that with some of the video clips on the blocking for Sweeney. That he's shown the upside there at least.
We mentioned it last week, that the staff did like him and that he had a blocking aspect to his game, and he actually wasn't even that bad as a receiver. But yeah, I was surprised with that as well. Aaron, what about you? Biggest surprise?
Yeah, I think Hollister is the biggest surprise, and I think I want to blame Greg first of all because
Thanks a lot, Greg.
talking to us about the guy sitting in the parking lot waiting, and I think that's what we just all assumed, and that's why it was such a big surprise is that we saw the cut, and then everybody said, "All right, well he'll be back tomorrow," and then talked to Brandon Bean, and it was like, well, no, he's not coming back. And so it was not that surprise. And so it became a big surprise that he wasn't there. And I kind of bought into the catches that we saw. And I think this is a good time for fans to take a look back, and we buy into those, things that you see that are, you see him catching touchdowns in the preseason, but what you don't pay attention to is the blocking aspect and some of the more fundamental aspects. And Brian Dable talked about this, that the summer was all about getting guys in fundamentals and, relearning the fundamentals of the offense. And some of that stuff matters. And it's kind of hard when you're watching as a casual fan to see a tight end blocking and understand if he's doing a good job, if he's doing his right assignment, but that stuff matters to this team. And you and Eric did a great breakdown that I've probably watched 3 or 4 times now about the Bills running game and the problems with the running game at the end of the season. And tight end blocking was a common theme with the problems with the run game. And they didn't address really any of the offensive line pieces. We're hoping Cody Ford gets better, but if they can improve the run blocking, which we've seen some with Knox, and if Sweeney's a good run blocker, I think that should allow some of that production. So in hindsight, just like everything else, it makes a lot more sense when you kind of take all that into account. But clearly that was the biggest surprise. And then the Daryl Johnson trade was quite a surprise and sort of shifted some of the numbers and things that we were looking at, because I think we all had him and doing the 7 defensive ends, which was a common theme among Bills Mafia. I don't know that anyone saw the trade coming. So those were probably the 2 biggest surprises for me.
Since Sterling and Aaron said you guys both, and Greg, feel free to chime in as well, because I know you probably have a take. Just sticking with the tight end aspect for a moment, and Sterling, we'll go back to you since you started this one. How do you feel collectively about the tight end grouping? Are you confident? Do you feel like it's thin? Or do you think, are you cool with Knox and less so with the depth? How are you feeling when it comes to that tight end grouping?
It's a thin, unproven room, but you have to look at context. And the context says that the Bills are going to spread them out. They're going to be using more wide receiver sets than they are using their tight ends. So now I think that changes if we see improvements in game from Dawson Knox. I think that is probably going to change, but it's really they can get away with it just because we use so many 10 personnel. I don't really see them having to rely on that position as much as other teams.
Aaron, how about you? You feeling confident in the tight end grouping?
I feel good in terms of what they expect out of that group. And this was something when the Ertz trade came up as a hot topic, I was kind of not really interested in giving away draft assets because there's only one ball, right? And we saw historical record-breaking offense from this Bills offense. And I don't even know if they're going to be able to get back to that level of production. And they have, I think, a better receiver in Emmanuel Sanders than they had in John Brown a year ago. So you have guys that can beat zone and Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders, which is kind of what you want out of your tight end position anyway. And I do think Knox is fine. I think he presents some type of a threat athletically. And I think that's really all you need in this offense. I think they'll get him the ball in space and try to get him going. I'm fine with where it is. Maybe it's a little thin, but I don't know, I always say like Back to the Future, where we're going, we don't need tight ends. Who needs roads? We don't need roads where we're going.
The tight ends of the road.
Yeah, I don't need a huge boost in production from this tight end spot. I'm actually much more concerned with not with Knox's drops, but with his run blocking a year ago. I'm much more concerned with how the tight ends impact the run game and getting more efficiency out of that than I am trying to rework this passing game, which is already at a historic level last year.
Oh, very good point. Greg, similar question, but a little slightly different. Going back all the way to when we did our first salary cap special, I think it was when the first time I heard you give the line regarding Dawson Knox and the whole like hope is not a plan. How much you enjoyed the idea of Jonnu Smith potentially being a Bill and things like that. How do you feel
about
now?
trading for Zach Ertz?
Yes, talking about trading for Zach Ertz amongst many other things. How do you feel now with that tight end grouping? Is it still hope is the plan, or are you a little more confident in Knox? I'm guessing by that squint and a scratch, not so much.
I mean, what Aaron said is fair. I just am at a slightly different lens of it. I already didn't expect that much of our tight end group, so I still don't expect that much of our tight end group. I already didn't think we had a tight end one, and now we still don't have a tight end one. We have a guy who starts for us that I don't believe would start for 25 other teams in the league. And, you know, he's has athletic upside. I know guys like Joe Marino are big fans of the potential, the athletic profile. You can build a logical case of why he's going to break out in this third year. That'd be awesome. But the reason that I wanted Zach Ertz is because in all the other competitions and battles, if Dane Jackson didn't, break out the way people thought, we still have Levi Wallace. If if Matt Breida or Antonio Williams, that we still have Zach Moss and Devin Singletary and in any of the other spots where we have these young upside guys. If Gregory Rousseau or Carlos Basham or Jay Epinesa didn't break out, we still have Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison. I don't know why we didn't have that at tight end. Why didn't we have the veteran fallback guy? That's why I wanted Zach Ertz, not because it was some enormous upgrade or it was some huge injection of talent. I just thought he was a professional starting caliber tight end, and we don't have a professional starting caliber tight end. I was hopeful that Hollister was going to be that, but we saw enough limitations. You and I had the conversation sitting in the stadium watching practice that if you really step back and think about it, if Hollister is that, I'll be kind and say neutral, but realistically a net negative as a blocker, then is he really that different than Jake Kumro or Gabe Davis? Like, is he really, is he just a big slot receiver, and that you look at the measurables and you look at the size of those other two guys, is he really all that different than just a big slot guy in what he brings? So I was impressed with Reggie Gilliam. I think he's exciting. I think he's a versatile, movable chess piece, and that's how I described Jacob Hollister back in the spring when they signed him, as, he can be an H-back, backup tight end, line up in the backfield if you need it, play special teams. Well, Reggie Gilliam did all those things and now looks pretty decent. And we watched him practice with the tight ends when we were there Wednesday. I think that he can check a handful of those boxes and we'll be in pretty good shape. So we're still going to be a wide receiver centric offense. It's still going to have those things. I was hopeful that we would add more of a threat to make defensive coordinators pay attention, but I don't, we scored 500 points last year without a whole lot from the tight end position. So obviously it's not that detrimental.
Fair point. To piggyback off of that, and Aaron, your whole Back to the Future reference, which was spot on. Are we at a point with this Bills offense, and maybe not even particular to the Bills, but I guess since we are a Bills podcast, in reference to the Bills here, what we saw last year with the Bills offense, amazing year from the offense, amazing year from Josh Allen, overall, just the amount of points, the ball movement, the surgical precision, the explosiveness, all those things. We did it without really a semblance of a running game, or at least strong execution in the running game. And we did it without, tons of production from the tight end. Where we're going, we don't need Rhodes, aka we don't need the tight ends. Greg mentioning the wide receiver-centric offense. With how successful offenses can be in today's NFL, and with how the rules favor the offense and favor quarterbacks and things like that, is it possible to win a Super Bowl without some of the traditional aspects of an offense? Like, can you win a Super Bowl passing the ball 80 or 90% of the time? Can you be a functioning passing offense without really having a semblance of a tight end, or maybe your tight end's only pulling in like 30 catches tops? Like, are we at that point in today's NFL where you can almost kind of forget some of the traditional aspects and roles and positions and move forward as the game has evolved if you build your team correctly? Are we there yet? And if so, are the Bills in that spot? Aaron, I'll start with you for that question.
I think Yeah, I think I'm picking the Bills to go to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl this year. I think they have the deepest roster in the AFC. I really do, and I think that they can hang with teams like the Bucs or whoever you're going to roll out in the NFC. There's an extension of, so what the Bills lack in a run game, they have an extension in the pass game and some of the concepts that come with the Daboll New England style Erhard Perkins offense, where you can get that short passing game going. We saw it in the last preseason game with Josh. Some of the quick outs, you saw Knox getting out there with quick outs. You saw Devin Singletary getting out there. We saw some of the creative stuff he's able to do with Matt Breida, getting guys in space. And I think that the game's sort of changing to, hey, we have to get things going on the run. We saw last year the Bills not even running really on first down and having great success with that. And so there's some things that came from a run game that you can replicate in an offense and get some of that short yardage. And I think the Bills have the tools to do it. Cole Beasley, one of the best in the league at squatting in zones and finding space. And Greg and I were talking about it when we were at the game. Doesn't take hits. You know, he just squeezes down and gets that extra yard or two. And I think that is sort of an extension of what you're missing out of the run game. And if, again, tight ends play a little bit better, we get a step forward from Cody Ford this year, a healthy Cody Ford, I think the run game issues will solve themselves as well. And you'll be able to rely on it a little bit differently anyway. And now we have a full off season. We've seen going back to schemes that work for these backs and the line doing some of that stuff. So I don't think that it's going to be totally what we saw last year. I think you'll have better efficiency out of the run game, but I absolutely think the Bills can go toe-to-toe in a shootout in the playoffs with their passing game. And I don't know that there's a defense in the league that you might be able to contain it, but I don't think you can stop it. I really don't.
Sterling, you mentioned the Bills' propensity for that 10 personnel aspect. So basically the same question to you. Can the Bills stick with that just wide receiver-centric offense, focus on that, and win a Super Bowl with that? Or do they need to mix in some more, or do they need to be more efficient in the run, or do they need to work in another aspect like the tight end game, or can they stick with what they do best, dance with the girl that brought them, and just focus on being amazing at that and win a Super Bowl like that?
I mean, I think you have to be multiple. I think you have to be able to do both in a sense. I think, the problem last year wasn't the offense is the reason why the Bills didn't go to the Super Bowl. It was the defense let them down. But having a run game that could, kind of supplement your dangerous passing game only makes your team much better. So people say, well, the Bills need to run more. I don't think the Bills need to run more. They don't need to have any more carries than they had last year. They just need to be better and getting more efficient out of the run game. So when you have a talent like Josh Allen, you don't have to run the ball. You don't have to. But and when it comes time to the playoffs, man, the games are won in the trenches. And I think that's where we failed last year was both sides of the ball on the line. So yeah, our offense is great. Like I agree with everything you guys are saying, and yeah, I picked the Bills to win the Super Bowl. But it has to start from from the defensive side of the ball, in my opinion.
Oh, okay, interesting take there, Greg. Similar, actually not even similar. Same question to you to kind of round out that thought. Do the Bills need that variability, or can they continue to build on what they did last year with that wide receiver centric aspect and just kind of run teams into the ground by putting up points?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's maybe somewhat of a misconception of even what the tight end position is nowadays. This isn't Ben Coates and Mark Bavaro, hand in the dirt. That's not what these guys are. Travis Kelce and Darren Waller line up as a slot or outside split receiver more than half the time. So it's relative in what's there. Now, would I like to have a big pass catching weapon like one of those guys? Yeah, sure. But I don't think that Travis Kelce, Darren Waller are impacting the run game or all of a sudden making it more variable that, they're mauling, run blocking is the reason that the Chiefs or the Raiders are better at rushing the ball. Like that's not their elite values at what they do. I will say George Kittle is probably the exception. He is as close as you can get to a real throwback. He is a badass blocker and a really good receiving threat. I would love to have a player like that. That would be awesome.
Mark Andrews, maybe.
Like yeah, Mark Andrews is pretty close. I think TJ Hawkinson has a chance to be a guy like that. So I would love to have an elite talent. I've made this case to lots of different people that I don't think Brian Daboll has some secret hatred of tight ends and that he just builds a scheme that is making sure that the tight end doesn't produce because he, loathes them. It's just he gets the ball to the talented people. The guys who can get open and make plays, he gets the ball to them. Our best talent is in other areas, so he schemes to the other areas. I promise if we had Darren Waller, he'd get a bunch of targets. Yep. It just would work that way. It's not, our scheme is not wide receiver centric. Our talent is wide receiver centric, and Brian Daboll's not dumb.
Well, and to piggyback off that, because you're saying like, oh, well, having a Travis Kelce or Darren Waller, really the Bills do have that depth of talent at the wide receiver position, because it's all about creating separation, right? Like that's really what you're trying to do. And some of these guys are just bigger men that are able to create separation differently. But Beasley still, do you want Travis Kelce on a linebacker or Cole Beasley on a linebacker? I feel like I'd take either one of those guys, and you can create separation. I was on Bruce Nolan's podcast, and we were talking about red zone targets and the back shoulder fades and stuff like that, and that needing to have some giant human being in the red zone, when really I think the NFL is trending towards just guys that can create separation. It doesn't have to be a big human being to do it, just anyone that can create separation in short space. And the Bills have that in spades, and it goes 4 or 5 deep into their wide receiver room. So again, I agree with you. Yeah, if you had a better tight end, they'd find ways to get him the ball, but I don't know that it's been a priority because of how deep they've been able to get this receiver room.
I think that's an excellent way to put it. And I love both of those points. The idea of the Bills' success and how it's tied to Brian Daboll, I don't think maybe it does amongst some of us, but I don't think it really gets talked about enough. His scheme ability and the way he draws up plays and creates and takes advantage of the skill sets of these players on offense. It really is the old, like setting your players and your team up for success. What he does to help Josh Allen identify defenses, what he does to make things easier pre-snap to post-snap in that transition, what he does to allow the receivers to be able to get space off the line of scrimmage and create even more and leverage space in zone and beat their guys off a man. It's really something that, again, we talk about I think it gets talked about the success of Josh Allen, and rightfully so. He's a tremendous quarterback, and Diggs is a tremendous wide receiver, and all this, the success that we have in talent, but the way they're coached up and set up for success by Brian Daboll and put into that position. I love those points that you guys make, is the idea of, if we had a Travis Kelce, we'd use a Travis Kelce, but we've got all this talent at wide receiver, so we use the talent at wide receiver. If we had talent at running back, we'd use the running backs more. If we had this, we'd use that, so on and so forth. Let me pull up the super chat there from Ron Beck. Thank you very much, Ron. And Ron mentioned, I think they're going to use McKenzie, a wide receiver, a lot more in our offense this season. Somebody who's seen an evolution in his game. He's talked about the effect that Cole Beasley has had on him from a mentoring aspect. And we've seen his route running improve year over year. And we know the gadgetry and the explosiveness that he brings. So I think that's a fair point, Ron. And thank you very much for the super chat and the donation. Sterling on the hoof last week when you guys had Jake Burns.
Yeah.
Right. He had that awesome statement that, if the Bills had Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt and like that Browns line, they'd probably run the ball more than what they do. Just like if the Browns had Josh Allen, they'd probably throw the ball a little more, so on and so forth. So the idea of, again, dancing with the girl that brought you type of thing, I think Daboll's been really great with that. And it's interesting to see where this team will go and continue to build on the things from last year. So awesome points on that. Sterling, I'm going to pivot it back to you, because I had this point brought up next, and you hit a really nice segue with it, talking about the trenches and how you need to be strong in the trenches. So last week, we picked 11 defensive linemen. We had 7 defensive ends, and we had 4 defensive tackles. The Bills ended up going with 11 defensive linemen, but they went 6 defensive ends, 5 defensive tackles. We had Bam Johnson making this roster. He obviously got traded for a 6th-round pick to Carolina. So initial thought on the Bam Johnson trade. Did you like it? What did you think of the return? And then also, in follow-up to that, how do you feel about the final 11 that have made this roster for the defensive line, seeing as how we need to be good in the trenches?
I was fine with the Bam Johnson trade. I mean, you drafted him in the 7th round. You got a 6 back for him. I mean, let's be honest. How much impact was he going to have in terms of snap count? I mean, when you got these guys flying off the ball and platooning, I mean, I don't think you really had necessarily a need to carry him on the roster. You got to get something out of him. I don't think you're going to be able to trade Mario Addison, So I like what Brandon Beane what he did with this move. as far as the defensive line, I think honestly, and maybe we could segue into this as well, but I want to get you guys' opinion on this. We were talking about, I made a comment about the Bills' defensive line depth being top 5 in the league. You know, we don't necessarily have the top end talent, but I went around and looked at other defensive line rooms, and you really realize, you know, I know there's a lot of, you know, potential based in there, but you go, there's not many defensive lines that are better than the Buffalo Bills from top to bottom. There really isn't. And so I think that's the key to the season, honestly. If the Bills, if Groot and these guys, and I think he should start over Mario Addison, but that's just me. I think there's something to be said for that. I think so. I think you have to. I think you have to. But we could talk about that later. But I think the defensive line is one of the best in the league. It's one of the best in the league, and there's not many teams, defensive line rooms that are better. So I expect big things out of this group this year.
Ooh, Greg, I want to pivot to you. So what do you think of the defensive line depth? And then also, let's stick on Sterling's thought for a bit there. What do you think of the idea of Groot being more of a fixture in the starting lineup than Mario Addison?
I absolutely think it's in play. And not only that, we've seen it. I mean, they started from day one with Tremaine Edmonds. They started from day one with Trey White. We've shown that if they have a first-round talent that they think is an elite player, they're not afraid to put him into the lineup and to start him. So I absolutely think that's in play. And I think we've seen that in several instances here, that he may be pushing his way to earn that position. I think that there's a little bit of projection in the statement of the best defensive line. I think you can make a really strong statement of the deepest. There's some teams with some top end guys that we don't quite have that yet, but I think that when you talk about the fact that we can roll, you know, 6 guys out there who can all get after the quarterback, and then if we see a little more from Ed Oliver, you know, on the interior, you know, you're talking 2 waves of pass rushers on 3rd and long that you can throw 7 different guys out there in our own version of the NASCAR package. You know, you're talking about some serious impact to be able to make. So I think that it's reasonable to make a statement like that. And I think that Rousseau has shown enough that maybe they platoon it, old guys on one side, young guys on the other, and it's Rousseau and Epinesa, and it's Addison and Hughes rotating. I think they'll start, you know, I don't think it's crazy to say that they'll start Rousseau and Hughes, and Addison will come in for Hughes, and Rousseau will come in, or Epinesa will come in for Rousseau, and that might be our primary rotation. I think that we see most of the snaps from Obata interior on pass rush. I just don't think we need to play him a ton outside of there. I think that Basham might be probably a healthy inactive early, and then maybe as the year goes, if we start to see that development, maybe he cuts into Mario Addison snaps, maybe he cuts into Obata snaps. You know, sometimes injuries are inevitable. We'll see where those things go, but I like the fact that we have so many options and so many things in play to be able to, you know, roll those things out there. And I do think if we come at it in waves, our back 7 from a coverage standpoint has been better than they showed last year, but when you're not getting home on blitzes, no one in the NFL can cover for that long. It's impossible to stay sticky for that long. So I think that there's a strong possibility to be able to see improvement overall, and the defense looks better because the defensive line is getting after the quarterback.
Aaron, what do you think about that? Where does this Bills D-line potentially rank in terms of where they could be potentially, and what type of impact should we expect to see from them, given how, you know, to Sterling's point, the depth here, you know, Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, AJ Epinesa, Groot, Carlos Basham, F.A. Obata, and then Ed Oliver, Starlet Sulule, Justin Zimmer, Harrison Phillips, Vernon Butler, a very deep group, top to bottom. What are your thoughts? Could this be a top 5 group? What kind of impact will they have this year for you?
Well, first of all, I do want to address Brian Bliss here. I would never roll my eyes at the trenches point. If you watch Cover 1 Buffalo, I'm a big believer in the games won in the trenches, and I get that you can neutralize things. So I just want to clear that up, that I'm not at all rolling my eyes at the trenches. In terms, I do think it's a little bit to say that it's one of the best groups in the league. I think I'd have to look a little bit deeper at some of the group. I agree with Greg that there's some more top end talent out there in the league. I think Jerry Hughes, in my opinion, is still by far the best and most disruptive defensive lineman on this team. And he's not yet, he's always up there in pressures, but he's not one of the top tier guys in the league at this point in his career. I think it's a good group. I think it's a solid group all around. I think adding stars big and having that big body in the middle. And what I'm most excited about is guys not playing out of position this year. I think we're going to get true Ed Oliver playing 3-tech, and that's going to help the linebackers having, bigger bodies in front of them. So I think just having a more complete team where guys aren't playing out of position is just going to help all the guys next to each other. And so I think we'll see more production out of this group than we saw a year ago. I think Jerry Hughes' ability to create some of that disruption, maybe he's not getting the sacks, but a lot of people made a big deal out of PFFs that Greg Rousseau was getting cleanup sacks. Well, you know what the Bills didn't have a year ago? They had guys getting pressures and disruption.
Nobody to clean up.
Nobody cleaned up sacks. So I think you'll see more production of the group. I'm not sure you're going to see anybody in a double-digit sack, but I think as a group, in terms of pressures and productions, they will be up there. I think they'll be in the top 10 in the NFL in terms of pressures and sacks and some of those numbers and win rates. And because they're going to be able to keep these guys fresh, they're not going to rely on all these guys to play a ton of snaps. You're going to probably see a decreased snap count for an aging Jerry Hughes and an aging Mario Addison, who people crap on Mario Addison quite a bit, but he had a lot of success last year in playing too many snaps.
Pressures, 5 sacks still.
And he is the first guy to admit that he wants to have a limited role in that. And I do think with some of the youth that they have at this position, I don't disagree with Greg. I said it on our podcast this last week that I could see a scenario where he's this year's Trent Murphy, where he starts the season and he's okay, he's fine, and then Basham continues to develop, and you start to see a transition away from Addison and into Basham coming in with some of that versatility. So I like the versatility. I like the people being able to play true to their positions. I think that's going to help some of these guys get more production out of them. So I'm excited about this group, and I agree with Greg entirely about the back end. I think guys like Levi Wallace are fine. But where things get a little bit hairy is we're trying to cover every defense eventually turns into man, right? And that's going to be a problem for some of these slower guys like Taryn Johnson, Levi Wallace. And that's where you get into some of the problems. They can cover 3 seconds. We start getting past that. That's where things get a little bit hairy for some of these guys with faster, bigger receivers. So I think it's only going to help everybody in the defense to everyone playing true to their position and creating more pressure.
50 sacks is usually kind of like a benchmark for teams to be like, oh, how good are they doing? Yeah, usually top 5. Good point, Greg. So 17-game season, 3 sacks a game would be 51 sacks. Let's just go around the horn real quick. We'll start with you, Sterling. Will the Bills, as a defense, reach 50 sacks this year?
So I got the Bills at 47. I did a show on the Hoof maybe a month ago about the defensive line, and the Bills had 38 sacks last year. And that was for 15th in the league.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty average. And so there's a lot to be had when it comes to the sack number. So I didn't want to go homerism and be like, oh, they're going to have over 50 because
10,000 sacks.
I think league leader, how many was 57, 55 or something like that? Something around there. But I don't think they're going to be far off. As far as pressures go, I think we're going to see a lot more in terms of pressuring the quarterback. And we have to also realize that it's a trend that quarterbacks are getting rid of the ball a lot quicker. So I love the fact that the guys that they have, are guys that like Gregory Rousseau, for instance, the way he's able to contain and keep his eyes on the quarterback and take proper angles. I think those things are going to be, it's one of those underrated things that I think a lot of people aren't really evaluating when talking about the prospects of the impact Gregory Rousseau can have. So I think it's great. Like I said, I think the Bills are going to end up with around 47 sacks. That's being modest. And if they get more than that, then great.
Cool. Aaron, what about you? 50 sacks for the Bills, yay or nay?
I might take the under there. I think it's going to be close. I agree with Sterling that I think, they're smack dab in the middle of the league last year. I don't think it was as bad as everybody wants to say it was. It looked real bad against Kansas City because Patrick Mahomes had all the time in the world and we didn't get any pressure or anything. I think pressures will increase. I don't know if it translates into sacks or not. I'm a big believer in that sacks are a little bit overrated and I'm more interested in pressures. So I think pressures increase. I don't know that transitions to sacks also have a huge jump. I think it will increase, but I think they'll probably jump up from 15th to right around top 10. But I don't know that they crack top 5 in the NFL sack total team.
Okay. Greg, what about you? 50 sacks.
Absolutely. So the way that there's a couple different things that are out there that Aaron touched on. Last year, they actually were second in pass rush win rate. They were very high in pressure rate. So those actually equate to that some of it was just bad luck in that you weren't, normally those are going to convert more often.
Yeah, we should positively regress to the mean.
If there was no improvement in talent, just in luck, if you had that many pressures again, you would have more sacks. Just statistically, that's what that normally shows. Then I think that we do have Ed Oliver able to play his penetrating three tech more often. We do have what looks like a pretty material step forward from AJ Epinesa, what looks like a nice addition in Gregory Rousseau, and that I think having a sack, 2 sacks every 3 games, not even one every game, more than what we had last year, isn't that huge. Having 12 more over 17 games is achievable, and it is 17 games. It's one more game than what we've had previously. I do think it's achievable. I think that it's possible. I don't think 47 is crazy. I think that's probably a pretty realistic estimate of what's there, but I actually think 50 is in play, and I think it could be without anybody having double digits. It could be 50 sacks with 5 guys having between 6 and 8. And that, a core of them are getting the chunk of it. And then blitzing linebackers, and we always have a handful from Taryn Johnson and Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde and Milano and Edmonds will have 1 or 2. Each of those kind of things cobbling together. So I think it's in play, and I think that they're going to be aggressive with it. And they saw what happened in the Super Bowl, and they realized that pressure is the path to accomplishing more of what we saw from a success standpoint. So I do expect to see a little bit of that, and think that it'll pay off. I think that that'll be a benefit.
We should take into account, though. Are you guys taking into account that they're not going to play the starters for the final 2 weeks because we got home field wrapped up with 2 games left? Or just taking that into account?
That's my guy.
There you go.
And I think there's something. Let me add something to that too. And going back, I watched the Kansas City Raiders game when the Raiders beat Kansas City, and I loved how they used Arden Key. They only rushed 3, but they kept him kind of at the 3 tech, and he was kind of just a spy and contained. I think the Bills, Arden Key's 6'5", 240. I think the Bills now have guys that where you can get kind of cute in some of your disguises and coverage, and he was a menace in that game. I mean, he was all over the field, And so I think, hey, I would love for Frazier to just dial something up like that. I mean, I think we now have the guys where we can kind of be, multiple in our fronts that way.
Ooh, I would take that. And Sterling, you had an awesome point about Gregory Rousseau earlier and his ability to contain and also compress the pocket. That's been something that we saw a lot of rushers coming out in college this year. Gregory Rousseau fits that mold. Joe Tryon fit that mold. Pass rushers who could convert speed to power with a little more length and compress the pocket. This was something I saw initially from Daniel Jeremiah, I think back in like February. The idea of pass rushing, the whole speed rush aspect where you get upfield and loop, is almost dying out now because you've got guys like Patrick Mahomes who just step up and then fill that hole that you just vacated, and they scramble, they make plays. And we've seen that time and time again with the Kansas City Chiefs, especially when the Bills have played them. So if you get a guy like Gregory Rousseau who can compress the pocket with his length and power and generate some pressure while at the same time constricting and just squeezing that pocket in, the quarterback has nowhere to go to escape, but he's also getting pressured at the same time. I think that compression aspect is something that really needs to be seen and understood from the fan base this year going into the season, because if you're getting that compression from the outside combined with any potential pass rush on the interior that we should see from Ed Oliver or F.A. Obata, who I know it's preseason, looks unblockable on the interior, much like he did last year for Carolina, ironically against Kansas City in several snaps. If we're pressuring from the outside with a compression style rush and then also getting pressure straight up in the quarterback's face, that pass rush is going to be nasty and something to be reckoned with forever.
I don't think it's an accident that they're targeting power rushers from college and then trying to help them become more explosive in what they do rather than going after looping pass rushers and trying to teach them how to compress a little bit more. They're getting, and we saw that when AJ Epinesa snatched the soul out of the Bears starting left tackle. That he has that skill set. He knows how to do that. Well, now he's got guys worried because he can dip around the corner, but when he turns it back on, it's not like he lost the ability to bull rush and to come at you with power. And we've obviously seen Rousseau has already shown a nice long arm, a nice ability to maintain. A lot of guys that have length don't use it. Like they're not able to convert it into actually translatable skill set from a power move, counter moves, ability to maintain length. And Rousseau does it over and over and over again. Like you can see the tackles kind of flailing at him because he's got those crazy long arms holding them at bay. And then they talked about the one sack, I think it was with Andy Dalton, might have been Jordan Love, I can't remember which one, where Rousseau reached over top and didn't even have him yet, but the quarterback could feel that he was there and tuck the ball down, and then Rousseau finished the sack. And just the fact that he was reaching over top of the tackle with his length influenced the fact that he was going to get the sack before he actually got it. And we've never had anybody, or not in a long time, have we had anybody with that kind of skill set.
Go ahead.
Well, I think we're talking a lot about the edge players on this team, but when I'm looking at some of the big plays for Rousseau, the thing that stood out to me is the interior pressure, which is something we didn't have at all a year ago. And I think you can credit Harrison Phillips for a couple of those sacks. You could credit even a Star Latule for some of the QB hits and pressures that they got. And Rousseau's the guy that the next day is getting all the GIFs out on Twitter and stuff like that. But these interior guys being able to get pressure, and we see that league wide when you can get pressure on the interior, that is really a great way to stop some of the quarterbacks. So if they can continue to build on that throughout the season, that's only going to make these edge rushers look better. I think it really starts in the interior for this team.
If you guys could, Sterling, we'll start with you. If you could only generate pressure through the interior or through the edge, which would you pick?
Interior all day. I just feel like, getting quarterbacks out of rhythm, making them scramble. There's not many Patrick Mahomes in this league. I think, getting pressure up front, getting it in their face, make them, reroute. I think that's the best way to go.
Aaron, what about you? Interior or edge?
Yeah, I think if I can only get pressures from a spot, I think interior, because you limit where the quarterback can step up, right? You can get pressure from the edge and a quarterback can still step up and manipulate a pocket without getting outside the pocket. And I agree. I think there's a lot more people are trying to find Josh Allen's, Patrick Mahomes type guys, but it's still a small quantity of quarterbacks that have that type of athleticism. And granted, that's the bar, especially for the Buffalo Bills. And so I'm glad they're building a team that can do both. And that's the bar. But as far as getting through a season and 32 teams, when you're measuring against that, I think interior pressure still makes it so quarterbacks can't step up in the pocket. And I think that's the best way to generate pressure still.
Agreed. Greg, I'm guessing from your nods that you second that notion as well.
Yeah, I don't. It's no different than saying, would you want pass rush or coverage? Well,
sure.
It's not neither or.
I want all the pressures.
Yeah, I want all the things.
I want consistent punts.
Yeah. I do think that there's logic, and that the reason the Bills didn't convert that many sacks last year is they not only had the shortest time from snap to throw in the NFL against them, it was actually by a significant amount. Like it was like 2.07, and like the next one was actually up a little ways for where the rest of the teams were. So it was a conscious plan of attack against the Bills to get the ball out quickly. So I hope that they're able to, compress that more quickly, right up the middle, getting pressure. Brady always used to talk about it. Peyton Manning always used to talk about it, that by far the more impactful pressure is in your face, at your feet, where you can't step into a throw. Right. It looks cool when Von Miller, runs parallel to the ground around the edge of a tackle and then swipes the ball out from the quarterback. But I mean, that move happens like once every 4 games. Like it's just not, you can't do it all the time. So I would prefer the compression and the ability to contain while you're pressing it in and getting into their face. But don't get me wrong, if we had a chance to get Myles Garrett coming around the corner, I'd take that too.
Yeah, I would take that. I think that's part of, it was mentioned a little bit in the chat, but we've talked about the edge play has been the focus of, I think, the offseason, especially after double dipping with Rousseau and Basham. But the idea of what Ed Oliver potentially could do this year, along with whoever we kick inside with him, especially in those Lambeau packages. Credit to whoever came up with that. I always forget who it is. Dominic something.
Barabbas.
Dominic, yep. Well, yep, I don't know how to pronounce it. So, yeah, fair enough. I'll go with what you said. Dominic Barabbas with that Lambeau package. If we can draw that pressure from the interior and then compress from the outside, the Bills' defensive line, to Sterling's original point earlier that I think got us started on this whole thing, the Bills could have one of the best defensive lines in the entire NFL, however you want to quantify it. If you want to quantify it by pressures or sacks or just havoc or making quarterbacks get off their spot and just chucking it up and throwing incompletions and throwing the ball away. The Bills' defensive line, very, very promising from what we've seen so
What's it going to do for Edmonds and Milano? I think that's one of the storylines that we haven't.
Well, Tremaine Edmonds is terrible and should get out.
Andre Smith is on the verge of starting.
Wait, did Tremaine make the team?
Yeah, right.
Barely.
But think about, like, I do think Tremaine struggles to get off blocks and stuff like that. But what if he's not getting touched? What if, you know what I mean? Like, if this defensive line is living up to their hype, but what impact do we see at this linebacker position for the Bills? Because that's probably the position with Tremaine Edmonds has a lot of questions still. Can he take that step forward? And I think now there's no excuses for him if this is a healthy defensive line from that's as good as we're talking in both run and pass game.
1,000%. I'm not a Tremaine apologist at all. I don't think he had as bad of a year as everybody likes to make it out. I also don't think he's going to be. I also don't think he's playing at an all-pro level. I think he is what he is. But I've said it multiple times on this show. I'm wearing an Ed Reed Miami Hurricanes jersey right now. Ed Reed is my favorite player of all time. He's fantastic. I have watched countless Ravens games throughout his tenure, and I've seen a ton of Ray Lewis. And Ray Lewis is one of the best linebackers of all time. But Ray Lewis playing behind Sam Adams and Tony Saragusa and Haloti Ngata is a vastly different linebacker than when he was playing not behind those guys. Their ability to keep him clean and allow him to run sideline to sideline. Those Super Bowl highlights, those first Super Bowl highlights, when he's running down Tiki Barber sideline to sideline, he's doing that because he's kept completely clean by the defensive line up front. Again, Ray Lewis is one of the best of all time, but you even look at the change. I wish I had the stats handy. Look at the change in Ravens defense productivity and Ray Lewis's numbers after they took Haloti Ngata from Oregon. And their biggest thing when taking Haloti Ngata, he was a great player in his own right and a very talented prospect coming out. But part of the reason they took him was to recreate that ability to keep Ray Lewis clean. You need to be able to prevent the guards and the centers from getting to that second level and getting to Tremaine Edmonds. And that's one of the things we've all touched on at different points with Star Lotulelei, that he doesn't do, the sexy things, that he's not putting up sacks and tons of tackles, but his ability to just stand his ground and eat space and take up blockers and keep his other defensive line mates free, or Tremaine Edmonds free, or Matt Milano free, is a huge thing. And what's Tremaine Edmonds' strength? His length and his athleticism. Cool. What's a way to neutralize that? Get big hog mollies into his body and prevent him from getting to that. But if those guys can't get to Tremaine and he can run free, that's a tremendous thing. I don't think that's being talked about enough, probably because everybody thinks Tremaine Edmonds is the worst linebacker in the history of football and should be replaced by, I don't know, one of us. Boy, actually, we're going to transition to some linebacker talk in a minute, but before I do that, I'd let off the beginning of the show with our presenting sponsor for this episode, the IDP Army, and I wanted to talk about that again. So the IDP Army, they're a fantasy sports media brand that creates entertaining and insightful fantasy football content and products with a holistic approach to fantasy football. Their flagship product, which is genuinely awesome, the Ultimate IDP Index, is the #1 resource for IDP fantasy football players. It's an index of tiered rankings, detailed player profiles that date all the way back to 2017. It's got contract information, suggested trade values, weekly snap percentage trackers, and suggested start sits that are updated daily in the season. Greg mentioned him earlier. The IDP Index was created and curated by Jordan Raines, founder of the IDP Army, and he's been a top 5 draft expert ranker for IDP on Fantasy Pros, very legitimate site, for the past 2 seasons. So go to idparmy.com for more details. Again, we don't partner with anybody unless they're legit. Wanted to throw that up there again. Greg spoke about the IDP Army and Jordan earlier. Really awesome stuff. And as we continue on this episode of Disguise Coverage, so I started talking about Tremaine Edmonds, and that leads us right into the linebacker position. So one of the things we debated on the Cover One Buffalo show last week in going over our final roster numbers was the idea of where was that sixth man going to come from? Was it going to come at linebacker or was it going to come at corner? Collectively, spearheaded by Greg, I think we all kind of settled on that Tyrell Dodson is a better football player at this moment than Rashad Wildgoose is, but we kept the six corners because of the necessity in that grouping, the thinness at the position, the idea that the Bills only run really two linebackers because of nickel, but because of nickel, they're always running three corners, so we kept the six. That's not what the Bills ended up doing. They went with five corners. They went with six linebackers. Tyrell Dodson made it. Rashad Wildgoose ended up on the practice squad. So, Greg, I'm going to start with you on this one. How do you feel when it comes to that linebacker and corner depth? We all like Tyrell Dodson, but do you feel corner is still a little thin? Do you think it was worthwhile because Dodson's a better player than all the guys were cut? How are you feeling when it comes to linebacker and corner?
Yeah, in a vacuum, if you're asking me what is my initial template of how I would slot out how many players are at each position with no names, and I'm just building an NFL roster, I would have six corners and five linebackers. Now, when that comes together and you have the talent that we had, Tyrell Dodson deserved to make this roster over Rashad Wildgoose or Nick McLeod or Elijah Griffin or any of the other guys who were Cam Lewis, anyone else who was floating out there. So the fact that we got three of them back on the practice squad, in the two that I wanted, which were Cam Lewis and Rashad Wildgoose, I feel pretty good about it. It's fine. I would love to have a veteran option who is in there. And I talked about, the people you could go after and try to, talk to Jimmy Moreland, or if Richard Sherman had his head on straight and was, things were cleared up from that standpoint. Or if you want to get really spicy, Bryce Callahan's on the market. I am very, very interested in that. I wanted a cornerback back in the draft. I wanted a quarterback back in free agency. I've wanted to inject talent into this room, but with what we have, they're still pretty good. Like, Levi Wallace was still a good starting cornerback. Dane Jackson pushed him and is going to be a fine backup. Taryn Johnson's a good, nickel corner. I'm actually a little more concerned about the depth at nickel than what was there, and I don't know for sure that Cam Lewis is ready to do that. And it's one of those things where I would have loved to have the problem we have at defensive line at corner, that we just had so many good cornerbacks we couldn't cut them and we had to keep seven corners, but it's just not where the roster is right now. We have a good, obviously Trey's still elite in a top five corner in the NFL. Levi Wallace is for as much as people give him crap, a legit starting caliber corner two. He's not a above average or a great one, but he's a starting caliber number two corner. And, you add into that Dane Jackson still has some potential to move up. I hope it's a priority next season, but that's the team that we got, and it's still pretty good.
Aaron, we'll work our way backwards here, a little reverse clockwise action. How do you feel? I know you and I were both proponents of the idea of keeping Wildgoose, especially after what he showed against Chicago, but then not so great against Green Bay. Are you, happy with the five corners? Would you still like to have seen six? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm happy with this group. I'd like to add if the ability to add's there. But this group doesn't bother me, I think, as much as some. But I've always liked Levi Wallace. I think Greg said it well. You look around the league, I think that's one thing as fans that we tend to hyper-focus on our own team and see our own flaws, and we don't look league-wide and judge these guys against their peers. And when you do judge them against their peers, there's not a lot of teams that have two top-tier cornerbacks on both sides of the ball. And I think Levi, in comparison to his peers, is right there, middle of the league. I call him adequate. I think that's fine to have adequate starting talent on the other side of a top cornerback in the league. Taryn Johnson, I think, had a slow start to the year and might have gotten replaced. But I think when you look at the big picture of his season last year, he's one of the better slot corners and more reliable tacklers in the run game. And back to Levi, his tackling efficiency is real high. Yes. Taryn's a really good tackler in run support, and the way this defense plays and with some of this zone coverage stuff, that's really important to have some run support from the back end of this defense. I think that's a thing, like blocking with tight ends. I think run support with cornerbacks gets overlooked a lot of the time because these guys are going to be containing a lot on the edge. And so I think these guys are a lot better than people think. Sarah Neal, Brandon Bean spoke to, he's one of the best tacklers on the team. And I know he had some struggles in the preseason. I think the catch on Chicago in that Chicago game was way overblown on Twitter. That was
he was
a
in
beautiful
position. He didn't make a play on the ball, but he was there.
He got beat at the line of scrimmage, recovered, was still in position, and that was just an incredible catch. And sometimes that's going to happen.
Literally bounced off his helmet as the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. He had good coverage. People say just turn around. That's a real quick bang, bang thing. It's easier said than done to just turn around. But I think he matches up well with tight ends, which has been a problem for the Bills here. I think he did a limited number of reps against Kelsey in that Kansas City game, but I liked what I saw and his ability to do that. But yeah, I'd like to have some additions to the cornerback specifically, but I don't know that they're out there right now, but I could roll with this team. And if there's a spot on this roster to have a deficiency, I think Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott have shown to be able to get the most out of the least talent at the cornerback position. We saw Sharice Wright fill in for this team and have valuable reps for this team. We saw EJ Gaines probably play the best he's ever played in his career with this Buffalo defense. So they've been a top passing defense most years that Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott have been here with guys like Levi Wallace and Taryn Johnson. And so I don't expect that floor to drop out too much.
You bring up an excellent point, and Greg, you touched on it as well, of kind of being worried more about nickel. Taryn Johnson does a lot of things that go unnoticed. I know he had, the pick against Pittsburgh. We know he had the pick against Baltimore, but his ability, Aaron, like you mentioned, to come up and run support, he basically functions as a third linebacker in a nickel corner's body. His ability to come up and sift through traffic and be able to fill in run lanes and get through the gaps and make plays in the backfield. His ability to fight off crackback blocks and understand tight end movement and motion from the tight ends and from the wide receivers. His ability
He's a great blitzer.
1,000% a great blitzer. I think he's always going to struggle in man coverage a little bit, which is not his forte, but he's strong in zone, and that run support aspect is tremendous. I've said it all, I've continued to say it. I make all the Asante Samuel Jr. jokes. I wanted a corner to upgrade, and if we would have taken Rousseau and Greg Newsome was there, if that potentially happened, I might have had a conniption on the live stream. Who knows what would have happened? But I always maintain that I'm okay with a Levi Dane platoon. I'm nervous for these nickel and the slot depth after Taryn Johnson because I think Siran Neal's a nice story. I think he's athletic. I like what he offers. I'm not as confident in him, and that nickel depth scares me a little bit. But to the point when it comes to this position, I don't think there was anybody we cut or we dropped. Again, we brought everybody back minus Nick McLeod, but it's not like, oh, well, yeah, we can just put Nick McLeod in the nickel and I'm going to feel so much better, like to everyone's point. But that nickel depth is something that might be tested at some point, and the appreciation for Taryn Johnson needs to be there. And, Sterling, to continue this conversation, 6 linebackers, 5 DBs. How do you feel? Are you cool with that? Are you cool with Tyrell Dodson at the extra spot? Are you cool with the 5 corners that we have? Do you want another? Do you think the depth is fine? What are your thoughts overall there?
I mean, I would love another corner. A good corner, though.
Right.
But one of the things that I think that we should bring to the table, you guys kind of hit on it. I think that Siran Neal is probably going to have a bigger role and impact than we really think he's going to. Mm-hmm. And I will go on to say that even though he's not a perfect product, but I think for what we saw echo throughout the preseason, I think this is a team that's going to pressure you up front. They're going to give it to you between, 20 to 20. But when you get down in the red zone, they're going to clamp down. And I think that's, we saw that last week, where they clamped down on the Packers. And I know, Love is playing quarterback and Devontae Adams. But I think this is Sean McDermott's, his mantra, his whole career to play defense this way. So I think Siran Neal's going to have a big impact. I love the fact that Taryn Johnson's coming into a contract year. I think that's going to put more pressure on him to continue to improve. And I think he's probably one of the a top 10 slot corner in this league. I would say that Tre'Davious White will bounce back. And I I love Levi Wallace. I mean, you can never have a perfect roster. Levi Wallace, for all the crap people give him, he's always around the ball. Like, he's never out of place, really.
If he's the worst part or the weakest link on your defense, you've got a good defense.
Right. And so, I think people need to back off of him a little bit and realize what he is. He's an average NFL athlete, but McDermott has juiced every ounce of potential that he can out of Levi Wallace, and I expect that for guys like Saran Neal. I just think it took him longer to develop. I mean, Saran Neal's a guy that played safety and linebacker in college, right?
So he really didn't small school
at a very small school. And if you go back and look at the history of him, he's kind of improved every year. He's not going to be a guy that's going to be able to play on the boundary, right? But he's probably our most athletic defensive back on the team.
Oh, yeah.
That's fair.
Right.
That's fair.
So I think there's a place to be set for him. I think they're going to use him in some packages. I think that's probably one of the reasons why they let DeMar Lowe walk.
That's a very fair point. I'm still a little nervous with Saran on the outside, but with what he can do at that kind of thick dime, big nickel.
No, we're not doing
Greg,
that.
I love it. Yes.
No.
Yes.
Why can't we do it?
Yes.
Thick dime. It's a thing.
We're not playing dime. I hate everybody.
We're a
out of any of the times that I just obnoxiously overused that term, the closest we got to it was Saran Neal against the Chiefs playing dime linebacker. Like that. That was the closest we got to it, is where he was out there. He really was kind of in that role of what you're looking to do. It's obviously just not part of our defense. Our defense is a nickel defense, not only in base, it's a nickel defense like 90% of the time. Like that's what we do. We run nickel. Come and get us. And
Taryn gives you that ability because, Anthony, you said it. He sort of has that ability to be sort of that third linebacker, and it gives you that ability to stay in base, which is nickel. And one more point I want to make with Taryn: those early struggles. There's no coincidence that it was with the struggles at linebacker and the health of Matt Milano, because I think, in my personal opinion, outside of quarterback, I think quarterback's clearly the hardest position to play in football. I think nickel cornerback is the second hardest position to play in football, because you don't have the boundary as another defender. You are in the middle with some of the shiftiest, you're with the Cole Beasleys of the league, and you're lined up with Keenan Allen, and he's off coverage because he's in the slot, and you don't get to put a hand on him to run routes. And so you got these guys and you have a lot of space, and in a Sean McDermott zone type defense, there's communication and passing off between linebackers and the outside corners. And so you have to be on your game and trust in that. And I think his slide and his ability in production, it's not a coincidence that it happened when we were going through the struggles at linebacker, because as soon as the linebacker started to get better, you saw Taryn Johnson's game start to pick up as well. So hopefully, again, having health across the board will only solidify that nickel spot.
Keeping it in the secondary, so we nailed. I don't. We want to give us credit for this. Well, maybe a little bit, but we nailed the safeties: Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Jaquan, the Truth Johnson.
And I told you guys Poyer wasn't getting cut.
You nailed it. Well done, Greg. Clap it up for Greg. Nice that Josh Thomas, somebody who looked really strong, ended up making it back on the practice squad. So that's a nice story. But I want to focus on Damar Hamlin, somebody who I would say, and Aaron, we're going to lead with you because I know how much you love him. He also retweeted a tweet from Greg yesterday from a thing that I said, which was pretty baller. So that was pretty cool. But I think Damar Hamlin's somebody who, thank you. Griff mentioned it in the comments. I did call Josh Allen making the 53. So if
that was a good point.
On the back,
well, I mean, you had to. I mean,
the graphic.
That graphic. I think it's the cool. Here's the thing, right? If you say something, anything,
a really smart take,
exactly, and you quote yourself, and then put it in a graphic, right? And then tweet that graphic of yourself on your Twitter.
Well, because if I tweet things, how do you know I'm the one saying them?
Exactly, because when you tweet something, it's not like it shows your handle or your Twitter name. When you tweet it, no one knows. Exactly, it's just out there in the ether. No one knows who tweeted it. So you have to show the graphic with your quote so people know where it comes from. See? So that's where that, Josh Allen graphic. Yeah, we get it here.
We got more coming.
We have so much more coming. But with Damar Hamlin, the excitement's really been building. I think it really even started on draft day when it seemed like Mel Kiper, he was the top guy on Mel Kiper's board for like 4 hours, and he just kept being like, Damar Hamlin, and nobody was taking him. And finally the Bills took him. A lot of hope and some positive thoughts for him, and he's somebody who flashed multiple times in the preseason. He's looked good in the open practices. Aaron, I know you like him a lot. What do you foresee, I should say, for Damar Hamlin this season? What type of role and type of work do you think he gets? And do you see him right now as the third safety, or do you see him as the fourth behind Jaquan Johnson?
That one's hard because Jaquan's been hurt, so we don't know where they plan on doing it. But I think right now he would be the third. I think I see him as Dean Marlowe as his floor. And I think that he's a poor man's Jordan Poyer / Micah Hyde. I think he fits that type of role of an interchangeable safety, can come up and get nasty in the box and play. Some concerns with the tackling in the even though he was willing to come up and get a little dirty in preseason, still got to finish those tackles. But the transition from Pittsburgh college defense to the Bills defense, I think, is a smooth transition for him. And the thing that I like about all these backup safeties and having Thomas on the practice squad is the same thing I kind of like about having Andre Smith and Terrell Dotson at the linebacker room is when you're building a roster, you're thinking of now in 2021, how can we, field the roster, but you're also thinking about the future of that position. And I like some young developmental guys at this position. We're not going to be able to, I said it just to Greg the other day, we're not going to be able to keep both Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde long term. One of those guys is going to get the money they deserve somewhere else when all these other contracts come up. So, and even if they continue to get money, they're going to age out of these positions at some point. And so to have these developmental prospects, I've been pounding the table here for the last couple of years that the Bills need to draft at safety and start really developing a safety behind them, even in the case of an injury. So for me, I think this year his floor is what we saw with Dean Marlowe, which I like, rosterable player in the NFL, a guy that you can rely on in case of emergency. But I think that he can become a poor man's version of the two great safeties we already have. And I think it will be a seamless transition athletically and his ability to understand the scheme.
Ooh, Sterling, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think Damar Hamlin's potential could be on this Buffalo Bills team?
I mean, I have to agree with what Aaron says, but one of the things I want to point out is when you watch Hamlin on tape, notice that he plays fast. Like the game isn't too much for him. You know what I'm saying? And that's one of the things that I feel like one of the core foundations that Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier can build upon. I think it's the nuances of the position. Some of the fundamental type stuff, like you see him missing tackles and sorts of things like that. But when you look at him in coverage, he's doing what he's supposed to do. And I think that's that's really strong for a rookie to come in that defense to be able to do that. So I think his ceiling is between, Jordan Poyer and Dean Marlowe. I think he gives you more of an athletic profile than Dean Marlowe. And I love the fact that it's not going to take so long to develop him. I think he can come in right now and he's probably safety number 3 right off the bench. And the fact that his instincts when you put him in the box, I love that he's nasty. It's kind of like having another Taryn Johnson back there but playing safety. Taryn Johnson is nasty and run support as well too. So I like what I've seen from Damar Hamlin. Josh Thomas is another guy that hey, I'm okay with him too. Josh Thomas showed some stuff this preseason I was really impressed with. I mean, if you look at both of their preseasons, I mean, can you really pick one, say which one's better? I mean, politically, I mean, you got to go with Hamlin because you in the draft capital, but Josh Thomas played his butt off too.
That's a very good point. And it was awesome that we were able to keep both. And, Greg, same question to you now. Especially you and I talked about Hamlin a pretty decent amount, all jokes aside, yesterday, from just his warm-ups to everything when he was functioning in 7-on-7 and even, with Micah Hyde.
Knuckle tape.
Baller, all the knuckles, first knuckle, second knuckle, just all taped up, baller move. He was running with the ones in 11-on-11 with Jaquan Johnson out and Micah Hyde not at practice. And he did not look lost out there. His ability, to Sterling's point, his ability in zone coverage to understand and leverage his area and understand and maintain integrity is honestly a very strong attribute of his, especially for someone who's so young. And Greg, you and I talked about that a lot yesterday. What do you foresee for him this year? What do you think he could be going forward in the future?
Yeah, I think that I'm nervous if the floor is Marleau day one is my only concern. And the reason that I was interested in there, I do think from a career standpoint, I think floor that's probably fairly conservative. I do think that Hamlin is going to have an NFL career, just like, Marleau had. And I think that Hamlin has a very reasonable possibility to be better than that. I'm a little bit nervous if he's ready for that day one, and I'm not myself a Jaquan Johnson guy, so I was nervous about not having that safety blanket of, I know Marleau can play both safety spots, he can back up nickel, he can play special teams. I wanted that versatility day one. That's why I was okay trying to go after Marleau when he got the, hey, go wait in the parking lot deal from Detroit. So he was released and then brought back the next day. Yeah. I really like Hamlin longer term. I think he was a nice investment. I mention all the time, he was Mel Kiper's best player available on the board for 2 hours and 45 minutes that day on day 3. That, a lot of people had him as a late day 2, 4th, 5th round pick, and that he fell for whatever reason, because guys do that in the draft, and ended up later than I think he probably should have. So I think we got nice value. And when we say has the ceiling of a Poyer and Hyde, Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde were not big time draft investments.
Right.
Neither of them signed in Buffalo as huge splashy signings. They were guys who were brought here and then developed and flourished. So I think there's absolutely a case to be made that I think we have both of them pretty securely here for 2 more years each. And that takes them through their age 32 season. And at some point in that timeline, we're going to be thinking about, hey, where does this come in a transition plan, and what is the succession plan? And I think if you told me that 3 years from now, Spencer Brown stepping in for Darrell Williams and Damar Hamlin stepping in for Micah Hyde, and some of these guys that we drafted are ready for that kind of step, I'd nod my head and say, yeah, that makes sense.
Hey, real quick, can you guys stop talking in front of me about all the stuff you guys talked about without me? That'd be real cool.
How did you get to go to that practice?
How did I get to go?
Yeah.
I wandered in, and some nice, kind Samaritan on the outside was like, hey, you look like a cool cat. Do you want some free tickets? And I was like, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we were all supposed to go together, but
Yeah.
we
Do you guys hold hands? Just tell me now. Were you holding hands the whole time?
Consistently, the whole time. Even when we went to, I was gonna, I'm out. I could hear that slam from my house, not just here on the mic. I heard it all the way to your place from here. That's how loud it was. To everyone's point, I wanted to pull up this tweet from myself, since we're doing this whole reference.
You want me to make a quote image for you of it?
Please do. Ooh. Yes. Also, do it of me doing like a thoughtful pose, like something like that. That'd be really sweet. Damar Hamlin, he's seen significant snaps in 4 straight years, 2017, 2018, 2019. And not to bog anyone down with numbers, but I'm going to. 2017, 22 free safety snaps, 168 in the slot, 112 box safety snaps. 2018, 89 free safety snaps, 417 in the slot, 172 in the box. 2019, 51 free safety snaps, 550 in the slot, 174 in the box. I see that comment from Griff. That's awesome. And then 2020, 59 free safety snaps, 424 in the slot, 179 in the box. Now, when he's in the slot, he's not functioning traditionally as a nickel corner, but he's a 4-year legitimate contributor starter for I don't want to throw out the term pro ready because so many people threw it out with Carlos Basham, but in a pro style defense over there at Pitt. He's experienced. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He's experienced at multiple levels, at multiple positions. He's somebody who I'm very intrigued with when it comes to his positioning, because I don't think we can put him into the nickel and just let him go. But he can function in a variety of layers and a variety of levels on this defense. And talking about his whole ceiling floor aspect, I liked what Dean Marleau brought, but I don't think he can do the coverage versatility, has the coverage versatility aspects that Damar Hamlin does, even here as a rookie. Yes, he's got to clean up some things. Yes, he's got to add some polish, but he's somebody who just really intrigues me because of the snap counts there. I remember looking it up when the Bills drafted him, and I saw so much film of him, and it was always like coming up from the safety spot, making a big hit and making all these, but I had made all these notes of where he aligned, and I was like, well, let me just check and see what his alignments were. And he got a lot of work everywhere. So it'd be interesting to see what he can do realistically in 2021 and where he goes. And all you guys touched on it with the points of Poyer and Hyde. When we signed Micah Hyde, he was mainly like a nickel punt returner kind of guy from Green Bay. Nobody saw it when, well, the Bills just signed their starting free safety. The thought was like, is he going to play safety? And then the Bills signed Poyer, and it was like, oh man, didn't he suck in Cleveland? Like, is he going to start at safety? This is rough. And look what they've turned into, something that Sean McDermott has a solid track record of when it comes to developing linebackers and developing guys in the secondary, especially at that safety position. I really like the long-term outlook for Damar Hamlin, as you guys all mentioned. And then obviously I don't even have to speak about my boy JJ, aka Jaquan Johnson, because he is what he is. No, but he's in all.
What is he?
Yeah,
I haven't figured it out yet. He's been
gold jacket wearer. No, I like what Jaquan Johnson does from his special teams aspect. I think he's very strong up around the box in the hook curls and the flats, where if things get tricky for him, the versatility with Hamlin, where you can drop him into that deep third aspect, I don't think you can get away with that with Jaquan Johnson a lot. Maybe once or twice to throw some things off. But if you're using Jaquan Johnson, he's more in the mold of a pure strong safety. But then at the same time, he's undersized and not very athletic for that strong safety aspect. It's unfortunate because in all seriousness, he's just a good football player. He's always around the ball. He understands how to leverage himself when it comes to fending off blockers, no matter what size they are. He understands what's going on in front of him. So he's somebody who I think can be reliable around the line of scrimmage. But part of the Bills' defense and why it's so successful, all jokes aside, is their ability to disguise coverage on the back end with Hyde and Poyer. I always got to work it in there. We worked it in earlier too, but Aaron, I think you and I were the only ones who noticed it. Yeah, Sterling mentioned it, but me and Aaron were the only ones who noticed it. I'm going to snippet that and use that as promo for this episode. That earlier
with developmental safeties, I always say it: if you're going to be small, at least be slow. And we have that with Jaquan Johnson.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. That was really. How do I?
Can you quote yourself and tweet that later?
That is going to be. That would. I'm not joking. That was going to be a graphic.
Yeah. I've always said it's better to lose than it is to win.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what we get out of that safety position. Nice that Thomas is back on the practice squad. Somebody mentioned it in the comments too. He was doing a lot of traffic direction. In that Bears game, telling, lining up everybody. So, and again, I
had made the case he was the kind of guy I could see McDermott pounding the table for. Like, he just checks so many boxes of the kind of guy that he wants to stomp for. But Terrell Dodson's a better football player. Damar Hamlin and Jaquan Johnson certainly deserve that spot over him. I love the way he played, the aggressive nature that he played with, and I'm genuinely glad we got him back on the practice squad. I think he deserves one of those elevation call-ups during the year. You'll let him run some special teams units and stuff like that. I think he could play some snaps still.
Great room for some young developmental guys to be in with. Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, right? Like, I mean, and with this defense and the things they do in disguised coverage, it really, but this defense is predicated on safety play, right? Like, that is what makes this defense go, is the confusion of what they are able to do split second. That's why Mac Jones starting for the Patriots, Zach Wilson starting for the Jets. I love having a bunch of rookie and young quarterbacks in the division, because you're not seeing the looks that Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde give you at the college level and their ability to transition. So having young guys to learn the game from them and how they play the game, man, is a huge benefit to this Buffalo Bills youth at that position.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that's going to start to wind things down for us here on this episode of Disguised Coverage. I got one more question for everyone. We're going to go around the horn one last time. Sterling, we're going to start with you. Could be anybody, offense, defense, could even be special teams. Who is your breakout player for 2021? Defined as they are going to exceed the expectations that have been set for them or in the minds of most people. Who's your breakout player?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's so many.
I like that you're thinking about it, not just being like, Gregory Rousseau.
I think it's going to be Dawson Knox. I really do think it's going to be Dawson Knox.
I love this.
It's so easy to exceed my expectations of Dawson Knox.
I was to say,
Not mine. You're gonna have to exceed mine, Sterling.
Yeah. So I just feel like the fact that they pretty much endorsed him this year, like they did, and not bringing in other tight end, and they released Jacob Hollister. I just think that there's a lot to be said about a tight end with his athletic profile coming into year 3, and I think there's going to be so much attention and focus being placed on the wide receivers. I think you're going to see Dawson Knox faced with a lot of if he can learn how to effectively sit in the zone, kind of like one of the things that we hope Zach Ertz would do if he were to come here. I think he could really have some success there. So I think our level of expectation is low. I think mine is for Dawson Knox, but I think he's going to exceed. Okay, I think he's going to be like, all right, I think he's going to be all right. He's going to turn into an average level tight end this year, right? Okay. Right now he's below average. He's toward the back end, but he's going to be average.
I like that.
I respect it.
Well played. Aaron, what about you?
There's a lot of places you can go, and I think one thing before I give you mine, I think not all the guys we think that are going to have this breakout 3rd, 4th year are going to, right? Right. So not everyone that we've been talking about, but for me, maybe I'm projecting who I want to have the most breakout year is Cody Ford. I think Cody Ford will. I think a healthy Cody Ford. I've liked what I've seen from him this preseason. One of my hot takes was that Ike Bacher was really going to challenge for that job, and it really has not happened. I don't know if it was because of the late start into training camp, but Cody Ford solidified his role along that offensive line. And I think that there's a chance that he could play up to where he was drafted finally. And if that's the case, that might be the step that this team needs with that run game and in the interior to really get things going on that offensive line.
Oh, I like that. 2 offensive picks. Greg, are you going to continue that trend, or are you going to lean more defense?
I'm not. I'm going to go with Tremaine Edmonds.
I like it.
Similar logic to Sterling's take on Knox is that part of it is I just think the expectations are unfairly low of him. And I think he's better than people think. And I think this year he's going to show it a little bit more. I think people underestimate how much he gutted through playing injured last year. And then also didn't have good defensive tackle play in front of him. And, Leslie Frazier came right out and said it, that when Matt Milano got hurt, Tremaine Edmonds tried to play both linebacker positions at once, and he tried to save the defense by himself and to his own detriment, and started, not trusting his reads, trying to make every single play rather than playing his role and covering his gap. I think the improved defensive line play in front of him will do wonders for him. Maybe more than anybody else will benefit from that will be him. Matt Milano staying healthy next to him, and then another year for him is he's still 23. He's still so young in his 4th year being where he is. I think that he's going to have a really strong season. I think he's going to make. So I argue with a lot of people online about him on occasion. But the one piece that they do have for him is, they're right. He should make more splash plays. I want a 1st-round pick at linebacker to make more noticeable, casual fan plays, plays that just anybody can go and be like, oh man, I saw him. I want more of those plays. That's a reasonable ask. I think he's going to be put in position to do that more often this year, where he can be there to do that and be free-flowing and moving and reacting more naturally and playing fast and using his crazy God-given, wingspan in the middle of that zone. I think we're going to be able to see the benefits of that this year, and he's my pick to exceed.
And talk about Bob Babbage while you're here.
Fantastic!
Any episode to talk about Bob.
Coaching. To get now to a spot where 4th year in that same system with the same smart, wise, voice in his ear, we're going to see it this year.
Can I add something to that point, Greg?
Yeah, please,
I think one of the knocks coming out on Edmonds that he was a guy that would take false steps, and he relied too much on his athleticism. So I think last year he couldn't do that. One, he was hurt. And 2, like you mentioned, he didn't have, what he needed, the tools to succeed. So the fact that I felt like he, like Taryn Johnson, had to take a step back and actually learn his weakest point, right? And I think we're going to see big improvements from him this year because now he has everything back. He's healthy, and I think we're going to see him play fast and make plays.
There's definitely no more excuses.
Right.
Like,
correct.
This is it.
Correct.
Where does I'll just give
what's yours?
I think the expectations are higher for him now, but mine since February has been AJ Epinesa. I think now the expectations are a little higher because people saw what he did in the preseason, so now people think that he's going to have a good year. But I'm just going to continue with that AJ Epinesa aspect. I think he notches somewhere between 8 to 10 sacks and is top 3 on the Bills in pressures. Total, maybe even percentage wise too. Yeah, a lot of it for me just came from to see the physical transformation he underwent last year in his first year in the NFL in a COVID offseason and season, his ability to transform his body. I will continue to shout it from the rooftops. I don't think people understand how much mental dedication and focus and fortitude it takes to transform your body like that in a professional setting like the NFL. And just seeing him do that, it just made me think like sky's the limit for that guy when it comes to working and everything that he needs to do. Like I thought he already had some talent, but everybody's got talent in the NFL. What do you do with it? And AJ Epinesa, I just think, is that guy to grind and work and push himself. And he's done that so far now, and I'm expecting big things from him. And I want to continue on the Tremaine Edmonds talk just to round this out, since it's always a hot topic. And, Greg mentioned it and everybody had some thoughts on it now. Where of all the middle linebackers in the NFL starting, I mean, I guess if you take 3-4 teams into account, there's some teams who have 2, but we'll say there's like 32 starting middle linebackers. Where is Tremaine Edmonds right now in rank in terms of starting middle linebackers? Is he top 15? Is he top 20? Does anyone feel secure in giving an answer? And so here's the thought. Think on that a little, and then follow it up with where is he right now? Where do we think he'll be after the 2021 season? Whoever's willing to go first.
So I'll go first. I think he's hovering around top 10. I don't know that I'd throw him in top 10. He's right there. I think you can make a case that he's inside the top 10, but I don't think he's outside of top 15. I think he's on the other side of that.
I would have said 15.
Okay. And what do you got, Sterling?
Yeah, I would say 15.
Yeah, I might range. It's tough depending on how you look at it. Anywhere, Will's got a good aspect.
Yeah, that's where I'm.
I'd take that average. If you put him anywhere from like 10 to 15, I don't have any problems with it. Right. I think you can make a case. All right, so now let's go to that second part. Aaron, we'll start with you since you volunteered as tribute first. Gun. Where do you think Tremaine Edmonds will be after this 2021 season?
Well, with no more excuses, and I think to Greg's point, I think he has to jump into that top 10, especially if he wants the type of contract that I think he's going to be looking for. And if he's the future middle linebacker long-term for this team, I think he's got to get into the top 10. So I'm going to put him with no excuses and just on paper with what we're talking about. I think he can make that jump. I think it brings him up a few spots at least.
Okay. I don't think with even a phenomenal season, there's much of anything he can do in 1 year to put himself on par with Fred Warner, Darius Leonard, that group, Bobby Wagner, guys like that. So I think a phenomenal season where he's in the talks for Defensive Player of the Year because so many splash plays and because the Bills go 15-2 and look amazing and he's making huge plays on primetime games. I think that for me is 6th. And he's right there. I think more realistically, he gets himself into that 8 to 10 range. I think that's doable. And I think that he can firmly put himself there, probably a 3rd Pro Bowl, maybe gets a 2nd team All Pro vote, something like that. Okay. I could see him getting into that range. And I don't think that's crazy because I think Joe Marino had him as his number 2 overall prospect that year and one of the highest, graded linebackers coming out from a physical skill set standpoint in years. It's all of can he put that together with the physical gifts? He has every prototypical box checked. He is built like Brian Urlacher. Now he just needs to play like it.
Oh, if we could get a Brian Urlacher middle linebacker performance, that would be amazing. Sterling, what do you got? Where do you think Tremaine Evans can end up after the 2021 year?
For the sake of being different tonight, I'm going to say top 5. I think I don't ever want to sound
I'm making a quote image of that.
Please
do it.
Please do. But you have to. I think it's more to the benefactor of what's going to happen up front and the defensive line. I think that's why we're going to see. I think as fans, right? People see splash plays, and you're going to see a bunch of splash plays from him because he's going to be clean. I mean, his peers already rank him, consecutive Pro Bowls. His peers already know how good he is. I think now you're going to start seeing some of the icing on the cake, and I think it's going to elevate his play to where he's probably, around that 5 or 6 range. I think he really there's not many linebackers that have a better athletic profile than him. Now you put that, now you have hosses around him to just make him better and just let him eat. I think it's not crazy to say the guy can be a top 5 linebacker in this league this year.
I got a question for kind of all you guys. Just came to my head. We know as Bills fans, the safeties, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, underrated in terms of individuals because of how good they play as a unit. Will Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds, if Tremaine takes that step forward, will they be sort of not seen as top individual players because of how that unit plays? Because they really do, Leslie Frazier talked about, they play off of each other so much. Will the unit hurt them and how they're viewed individually going forward?
I'll start there. I don't think so, just because what we're going to see in terms of they're not going to allow big plays, in the red zone. I think they're going to be clamps in the red zone. I think that's going to really solidify. I mean, if you go back, so like me being from living in Denver, one of the coolest things I got to see during the Peyton Manning run was the no-fly zone and what they were able to do. And I'm not saying that this is the no-fly zone, but what they were able to do, man, how they were able to disguise coverage, and they didn't give up many big plays. It wasn't from a statistical point of view, in terms of like gaudy numbers, but They were just blankets.
Yeah.
And I think our safeties have that caliber to do that.
But I'm saying the linebackers. Will the linebackers be so like the safeties when they do safety tandem things? Poyer and Hyde aren't listed in those top safety units, and individually they're not really often talked about as top safeties in the league. Will that same thing where Milano and Edmonds play so well together and they're both really good? I think a lot of the times people talk about Matt Milano as that sort of like 10th, 12th best linebacker in the league. Even if Tremaine Edmonds takes that jump, will it be tied to the unit itself at linebacker, or will they individually get the praise they deserve?
That's a great question.
I'll go first on that one. No, I don't think they'll get the individual praise. I'm going to throw out that super chat first before I go into the answer. Thank you so much for the donation. Appreciate it. And the comment too, this offense will score fast and often. This will force teams to throw more. This is why I'm not too worried about our defense stopping the run. Fair enough point on that. I mean,
more opportunities for sacks, for big plays, interceptions,
1,000%.
tip balls, defense passes.
Very much in that mold of
although that Colts game.
That's what I was about to say. That's what I was about to say. Like, look, the Bills got out on them quick. Everybody needs to know that, and they used the run game and some athletic tight ends to get them back in the game. Yeah. That's all I'm saying. So
true.
That run game scares me. The being able to stop the run scares me.
Well, that's why I continue to, despite the feelings of a certain member of Cover One, I think the Browns are a threat based on some things that they can do. Especially in that run game. I said it last year.
Baker's not horrible.
Correct. Baker Mayfield is not a horrible quarterback. Continue to say that. But thank you very much for the super chat. And Griff, thank you very much for the super chat as well. Appreciate you.
All right, now answer my question.
Coverage thing. I think Matt Milano is much better right now than he gets credit for. I posted a graphic a couple days ago. Max at Mafia Numbers, he might be the best member of Cover One.
How to say his last name.
Robleski.
Yeah. Max Robleski.
Nailed it. What's up now, Aaron?
Did well.
He might be the most talented guy.
Row your boat. Row Blesky.
Yeah, and then bless it. Ski, and then ski like you're in the Alps. His ability to just put together the charts and graphics that he does, and with the context, and he's at Mafia Numbers. Go follow him, everybody, on Twitter. Like, he's a legitimately awesome follow. I'm not just saying that. And he put together the man and zone coverage efficiency numbers for linebackers from 2018 to 2020. And Matt Milano in zone blew everybody out of the water. Like, it's nowhere close. And a healthy Matt Milano, especially when he started to clean up some of his tackling issues, I think he's much better than he gets credit for. And I think he already doesn't get talked about enough as he is. I'm not saying he's the best at his position in the league, but I think, again, if I'm putting in the perspective of, on a national scale, I don't think fans of other teams are coming out being like, oh yeah, Matt Milano in Buffalo. Oh yeah, Matt Milano in Buffalo. I think, even if they're talking about the defense, maybe now it's like Gregory Rousseau just because he's huge and he's got an awesome nickname. But if people are talking about the Bills, they're really still talking about Josh Allen. I think even if Edmonds starts to ascend and reach that level, again, Hyde and Poyer, to your point, we're talking about one of the best safety tandems in the NFL, top 5. I don't even think that's debatable. I know there's a lot of great ones, but they are not talked about in that spectrum at all. So I don't see Tremaine, if he takes a jump, I see him and Milano suffering the same sort of fate in that we will know their value and see it, but I don't think they're going to get that national recognition and they're going to get talked about like, oh man, what a linebacker tandem the Bills have. I don't think it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for answering me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I appreciate you asking it. That was a very thoughtful question. I had a question as well, and I think we can start to wrap things up here. I was going to ask the question of, I think we can all agree right now, Matt Milano is the best linebacker on this Bills team.
Yeah.
Yes, he's played the best to this point, yeah.
Yes.
He's played better than Tremaine Edmonds.
Is there anything Tremaine Edmonds can do to usurp him and finish 2021 as the best linebacker on this team?
Get better in coverage.
Okay.
Splash plays. Yeah, I think
he has a higher physical upside than Milano has. He can physically do things Milano can't. He just would have to do them and at a clip that catches and surpasses him. So you'd be talking about a phenomenal season. But yeah, he certainly could.
Yep. Yeah, I second that comment exactly. Yeah, I think the splash plays that Greg alluded to, making some of the more of those and being disruptive with that length, I think at least could be on par, if not better.
Yeah.
Ooh. Sterling, same thought for you.
He's got to be able to cover tight ends.
Yeah.
I mean, that's his struggle. Is pass coverage. He has to improve there.
Especially in zone. He had, again, Max and his graphics strong in man coverage, but that zone aspect, especially when targeted, and it's weird for someone of his athleticism and his length and his size. And I'm really interested to see the things for Tremaine. I broke several things down last year for him especially when he was hurt, especially that first Kansas City game. You could almost like see him or hear him like thinking out on the field with each play. You could see him trying to be like, okay, this guy's moving here, this guy's pulling, I need to fill this gap. Touchdown. Like,
Mahomes was just toying with him in that AFC Championship game. It was embarrassing.
And he progressed as he got healthier, but then, that AFC Championship game just wasn't great. I mean, in all fairness, defensive, performance all around, not great defensively. Right. But if Edmonds can shore up that mental aspect of it and start to tie it all in together with those physical attributes, again, we all talk about the potential and the ceiling and how young he is, but man, there could be some really big things if Tremaine Edmonds is that breakout guy, as several of you guys have mentioned and potentially talked about. That would be huge. I'm going to throw up the banner here that says Toodles, you guys. And the reason I'm throwing up that banner is because we're saying goodbye. And Toodles is a form of saying goodbye. I want to, as always, thank everyone who rode with us live on this episode. The engagement has been crazy. We've been going for an hour and almost 37 minutes. It's 10:40 at night on a Thursday, and we've got 155 live viewers watching this. So thank you so much to everybody. Awesome. The chat has been great, engaging, interactive. Even that one guy who was trying to talk about Wyatt Teller and trolling everybody about that. Shout out to that guy for being wrong.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I love people who don't ever give Bill Callahan credit for Wyatt Teller's development and just think that he would have been an all-pro wherever. The same way if the Bills would have drafted Mahomes, I don't know if he would have turned into it right away. It's like, let's talk less so. Yeah, but even shout out to that guy. But thank you to everybody for riding with us live. If you weren't riding with us live, and you're watching this later, listening to it later, whatever have you, on whatever podcasting platform or YouTube, thank you so much for your listen. Thank you very much for your download, anything and everything like that. The support, I'm sure I echo the sentiments of everybody on this show and Cover One wide as a whole. We are nothing without you guys, and the support and the undying loyalty from so many of you guys keeps us going is tremendous. So thank you very much for that. And thank you very much to my guests on tonight's show, Mr. Gregory Tompsett, Mr. Sterling Furrowh, Mr. Aaron Quinn. I literally would not have been able to do this episode without you guys. It was nice that we could get together 2 weeks in a row and do a little sequel continuation Cover One Super Show aspect on
now
this
it's
thing.
time for the season.
And now it's time for the season. We will, at this time next week, we will be leading into the start of the regular season. Bills, Steelers, real football. It's going to matter. Oh, man, I'm tremendously excited. I know you guys are as well. And let's go around as we start to go our separate ways and say our goodbyes. Let's all say where we come from, likes, fears, signs, what we like, moonlit walks on the beach. And Sterling, we'll start with you. Tell all the good people where they can find you and what you're afraid of, what your sign is, and what gets you going in the morning.
Wow, that's a lot. You guys know where to find me on Twitter at Furrowh Sterling, and then we have our show on Tuesday nights on the Cover One Network. It is the Hoof Live. I'm joined by Anthony, crazy ass, and Eric. I'm just looking for a bucket of fried chicken, to be honest.
Copy that. Aaron, what about you?
You can find me Aaron Quinn 716. I'm a Capricorn. I enjoy adequate cornerback play, and you can always find me with this handsome guy over here, Greg Tompsett, every Wednesday, and then post game shows. We're going to start those up here soon, and I think somebody up here is joining us on the post game here this year, so look forward to that. And you consume all this Cover One content, man. It's not just us. Everybody, we got shows every night of the weekend. You're ready for the season, so everybody's killing it. The website's killing it. Rob, Kyle, those guys are just pumping out. Liam, people are pumping out content. So make sure you're all over it because it just ramps up from here, guys.
Absolutely. You can find me at Greg Tompsett hanging out on the Cover One preview and post-game show with Aaron and now with Anthony. Join us on the post-game show. Excited in the Cover One Slack channel. Make sure you're checking out everything we got going on with the Cover One Premium membership. You get to come and talk with us. Game day is awesome in there. So fun to be able to be around, be able to get even more content behind the paywall. Really appreciate it. But other than that, just getting ready for this Bills season.
Hell yeah. And last little plug here as we go through fantasy season, still ramping up hardcore. We've been talking about this awesome partnership we've had since we started the Cover One Fantasy Show. Underdog Fantasy, download that app, use the Cover One promo, and when you deposit $10, you get a free $25. You're doubling and then some your deposit because of Underdog, because of that promo code with Cover One. Again, that's Cover and the number one, all one word. Download Underdog Fantasy, use that Cover One promo, get your free $25. Thank you to Sterling. Thank you to Greg. Thank you to Aaron. Thank you to everybody listening, watching live later, whatever have you. I appreciate catch it, put it in my pocket. Appreciate you guys so much. Thank you guys for stopping by, and we're at the start and the precipice of the 2021 regular season. Get excited. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones all stay safe and do well. Godspeed. We'll see you next week.